And believe me when I say, like, we tried all sorts of offers, like, use the app for free for 3 months, like only pay us a fraction of what we make for you. Other people in the batch, they're growing like fast, and sometimes you're not growing as fast, essentially. But as a venture scale company, that's horrible. Like, it's better to shut down than have a sort of company that's only making 5K a month.
In this interview, I had the opportunity to sit down with Aditya Mehta, the co-founder of Suggestr, and he was also part of Y Combinator in 2022. He had to shut down Suggestr a few months after attending Y Combinator, and in this interview, I was able to find out what happened before joining Y Combinator and after joining Y Combinator. Currently, Aditya helps startups in their growth stage, and you can check out his company cogitogroup.xyz. I'll leave a link in the description, but enjoy the interview. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate the time you took. Before we get to your whole journey with Suggestr, I just wanted to run through what I found in your LinkedIn. So your journey right before Suggestr and then entering Suggestr. And you can just correct me where I got it wrong and just tell me what your journey was. So Suggestr was ran between April of 2021 to May 2022, correct?
No, so Suggester, we started it, I think it was Jan of 2021. The legal entity started in May, but we were working on it even before we incorporated.
Understood. So you worked Y Combinator between January to March of 2022, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and you run your startup in Singapore?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay, all right. And before Suggester, you were the co-founder of Bamboo Network,
Yeah,
and you were also at the startup residence at Entrepreneur First.
correct, yeah.
Just to start off the questions, did you come up with the idea for Suggester? Was it like with your co-founder, or like whose idea was it?
I think so quick context is, like, we went through this startup accelerator called Entrepreneur First in Singapore. And
Mhm.
it's like a co-founder dating format, like the whole accelerator. So the point is that, they put 50 or so founders in a proverbial room. You meet people, you discuss different ideas, and then essentially they end up funding, like, say, 8 to 10 companies each cohort. um, so like, Suggester was one of the ideas that I had on a list of ideas as I was, meeting different people and figuring out and validating different things. um it was not my it was not the idea I had at the top of the list. It was probably like the second or third thing on my list. But when I met Alexi, it just seemed like such a perfect fit with his background in multimodal AI, and both of us wanting to build something in AI, that we sort of ran with it.
All right, that's very interesting. So, did it start as what it was applied as in Y Combinator? Like the idea, what you wrote down during the accelerator, that was, or did it evolve into something else?
I think there was a whole metamorphosis of the idea. Like, in its first draft, it was just product recommendations as a service. So super broad, super vague. We didn't really have a niche. And when we started out, when we started out the process of validation, we kept it broad intentionally, because we didn't really know who needed it, or how badly they needed it. So we sort of tested this out with media publications, property websites. um, E-commerce was one of the niches that we tested out. We also tested out, like, people who build marketplaces and apps, so like internal search and rankings, etc. So we tried out a bunch of different beachheads, and e-commerce was the beachhead that we chose. Happy to dig into why we decided to go with e-commerce and what the assumptions were, and how all of them turned out to be fake or false, or at least not true to the extent we were hoping they would be.
Okay, okay. We'll get to that. So was the whole idea already operational before Y Combinator? As in, did you guys have already customers that were using it or trying to implement it?
Mm, I would say we were probably one of the earlier companies in the batch in terms of maturity. We had just launched our product maybe 2 or 3 weeks before writing the YC application. We had a handful of customers, like I think it was less than 10 customers at that point. we were making like a tiny bit of revenue, like in the hundreds. And but what we did have working for us is we were generating a lot of revenue for our customers. So the whole solution was product recommendations for e-commerce, right? So the whole point is that if you use personalization within an e-commerce store, you can generate additional revenue. So even though our own revenue as a company was in the hundreds, we were generating something to the tune of, I think, $10,000-15,000 per month in additional revenue for the brands that were using us.
Gotcha. All right. And was this your personal first application into Y Combinator, or had you applied previously with other startups?
It was my first time.
All right. Okay. And so
Which is
shortly,
it's sorry,
yeah.
it's not the norm, because even in my batch, I think roughly half the batch, it was their third time or more getting in. um yeah, it's very much like not the norm. I think most people do end up applying multiple times before they get accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I've had a lot of friends to apply multiple times, and then it's like only a few percent get in. It's very selective. Shortly after YC, you stopped working on Suggestr. So as you were talking about earlier, there was like an evolution, but it didn't stick and stuff. So I just want to know at YC, what was the evolution of the idea? How was it like working, learning folks at YC, and the relationship that you were building within your team, and how it all culminated to lead to like through the batch, like what happened with Suggester through YC.
Yeah, sure. um See, the thing about YC is it's really good as a forcing function. It forces you to, come to terms with whether the business is actually something people need or not, because essentially you put in a cohort with, I think in our case it was 350 or 400 other companies, equally driven, maybe even more driven, equally smart, even smarter people. And suddenly, and you also put in like smaller groups where, on a week on week basis you get to sort of, trade notes, compare, see what's working, what's not working. So you see how fast other people building similar companies, not necessarily competitors, but other people in the batch, they're growing like fast, and sometimes you're not growing as fast, essentially. um yeah, so like one part of that is the community that YC gives you. I think the other part is the advice and time with the partners, who are also very experienced founders. They've been there, done this, and then they've seen like hundreds of companies, maybe even thousands of companies make similar mistakes. So they give a lot of valuable advice. um yeah, so our YC experience, essentially, as I said, we were very early when we got in with this thesis that, hey, the actual recommendation engine works and it makes a lot of money. It makes a significant impact on the stores that use it. So let's see if we can now take this from hundreds of month in revenue to like $1 million, $10 million, whatever, a month in revenue. So that was the thesis that we entered with. And just to circle back, for the purposes of narrating the story, our thesis was that let's go with e-commerce because there's Shopify as an ecosystem, there's the Shopify app store as a distribution channel, and if we get our app in the app store, we'll start getting some distribution from the app store. That was the logic.
Mhm.
At least that was the thesis. Doesn't work in 2022. Doesn't work even more in 2023. It's such a crowded marketplace. Like there's 8,000 or so apps already in the Shopify ecosystem. Just within personalization, there's like, I think in the hundreds of apps, maybe 150, 200 apps, that if you look at the app listing, they all claim the exact same thing. Like I may have a better AI and another app may have no AI, but as a merchant, how do you differentiate? Because everybody says the same thing. Like the listings all look the same. Um, so, anyways, like from the app store, you basically get nothing. Like you don't get any distribution. So you have to find ways of distributing like outside the app store. So what we found was working for us was a sales led motion, which essentially means, you initially it's founder led sales. So you reach out, you send out cold emails, you try to book demos, then you try to close people on those demos and so on. So it's quite an involved process. And
Yeah.
the general rule of thumb is like you only want to do a sales led motion if you're making at least $5,000 to $6,000 a year from a customer on the lower end. Ideally, you're making more money. For our case,
Mhm.
on the higher end, we were making like $3,000 from our customer. Like our pricing was not high enough to support a sales led motion. Because again, our thesis was we're going to put this app out there, we're going to do some digital marketing, maybe get users easily. So our pricing reflected that. Like our plan started from 29 a month. Our higher plans was like 249 a month. We had one plan at 499, but we didn't really have anybody on that plan when we were operating. So essentially, what we were seeing is that, yeah, when somebody tries the app, we had a 90% conversion rate to them becoming a paying customer, because the app would sort of increase the total store revenue by anywhere to 7 to 11%. But what was really uphill was getting people to actually try it. And believe me when I say, like, we tried all sorts of offers, like, use the app for free for 3 months, like only pay us a fraction of what we make for you. Like anything pretty much we could think of under the sun, we tried it as offers. But yeah, it's growth was slow. I think that's the bottom line. um so I not sure if I can share exact numbers, but essentially, yeah, when we got into YC, we were in the hundreds of MRR. When we at the end of YC, we were in the mid four figures MRR.
Okay.
And it's not that we were not growing. I mean, we were growing, but the growth was slow, especially compared to other companies in the batch that were growing like 8, 9, 10% week on week, right? So it's like the hockey stick. So
Okay.
that made us realize that benchmarked against other companies, our growth is like extremely slow. Now, see, that's not a problem if you are sort of a solopreneur or an indie hacker doing something on the side, right? Like if you have, like, say, a weekend project, and over the course of a year, that project is bringing you like $6,000 a month in revenue, $10,000 a month. That's perfect, right? That's 100K a month in additional side income. But as a venture scale company, that's horrible. Like it's better to shut down than have a sort of company that's only making 5K a month, because you're gunning for like 100 million in revenue, right? So if you don't see a path from going from like whatever you are to 100 million in revenue, it's worth sitting down and questioning whether you want to continue growing very slowly. Because for example, even Paul Graham, he defines that startups are all about speed of growth. If you're not growing fast
Yeah.
enough, you're essentially a small business.
Mm.
um, of course, we had the privilege and pleasure of having like very nice investors who are very understanding about this whole thing. um, and another thing we noticed was that there was no Shopify, sorry, e-commerce enablement company in the personalization space, which was doing more than 4 to 5 million a year in revenue. So there, like we were doing like, say, low six figures in a year in revenue, and then we saw there was a ceiling at like mid seven figures. And even in this journey, the growth was slow, right? So we are like,
Yeah.
okay, we're growing slow, but then also there's a ceiling which is like much lower than where we would like it to be. It's not been done before. Like some of the larger, more established personalization players in the ecosystem were doing like maybe 4 or 5 million a year,
Uh-huh.
and they were like extremely sales led. Like if you look at their org charts, like 70% of the company is salespeople. So again, circling back to that point, that the go to
Yeah.
market motion and the how much we're making money from the customers per year is not compatible. So yeah, I think this was the business side which sort of led us to question, like, is it even worth it to continue pursuing this and burning more money, or should we like intentionally decide to shut shop and either pivot or try something else?
Yeah, that's great insight because the way you're saying how you compared to other companies, I was going to ask a question which was this a good decision to compare yourself to other companies? But when you consider that you are you get VC money and you're expected to grow at this pace, it's definitely like the expectations are set differently.
Exactly. So,
Um,
and not even that whether we want to compare or not, because I mean, the investors who look at a YC cohort are all looking at SaaS companies, so they're going to be comparing anyways, regardless of whether we compare or not. So it's
right.
it's worth it to also, especially, I mean, if you are taking venture capital, then it's worth it to also evaluate how the company looks to investors when they're looking at a demo day pitch, or you're talking to them.
Yeah. And when I first emailed you, you had told me that you and your co-founder, you were having diverging directions into what to do next.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So yeah, my co-founder Alexi is one of the smartest guys I've met till date. So he was his background was he was a AI researcher at Facebook AI Research. Now I think it's Meta AI Research, whatever. Keep changing the names. And he had published like about 15, 16 papers in the field of AI. He had worked on multimodal AI, that exact technology that we wanted to use. Oh, by the way, interesting point. I'll come to it in a second, like about what I mean by diverging goals. But um, the whole point. So we are very aware that product recommendations exist, and mostly recommendations you need a lot of data to make it happen, right? That's the whole thing. That's why small stores don't use recommendation systems, because they don't have enough data, right? So
Mhm.
what multimodal AI allowed us to do was to have better recommendations than say traditional collaborative filtering, with almost 100 times less data, because
Right.
it's like GPT, right? You show it a page, it can understand what it means. So you know how GPT-4 you can also have visual comparisons, like it has visual attributes. So the AI we
Yeah.
built was similar. It could comprehend text, comprehend images, and really understand products like a human does. So it's like if you
Mhm.
show it a shirt, it will find all the other complementary products. You don't need to provide it any data. So even if you had zero order history, you could still have like really really good recommendations that would increase your store revenue anywhere between 5 to 6%. And of course, if you the more order history you have, it processes it, it subsumes it, makes it more accurate. But even if you have like say 5 products and no order history, the solution still worked. So that was the whole reason why we were very excited about the technology, and then we still brought it out. Anyways, so yeah, when we sort of realized that the business was, it didn't really make sense to pursue this path. We were considering a bunch of different pivots. Alexi was very interested in doing something in Web3, and I was actually fairly burnt out at that point, and I wanted to take some time off. Like I didn't want to just jump into another idea straight away. I wanted to just relax for a bit, maybe reflect, just take some time off and then decide what I want to do next. So that is essentially what happened. So Alexi started his next company like shortly after, which is doing really well now. It's called Slice. He's basically building the Google Ads for Web3. Very,
Okay.
very cool idea. You should check it out. So and on my side, yeah, I took some time off, and then I realized that now what I want to do is I want to actually build a service business. And what I enjoyed, like one of the things I really enjoyed about my startup journeys was the growth aspect of it, because that's where the hardest problem solving part is. And I was sort of organically helping out a bunch of my friends with their growth issues, consulting on the side. So I decided to make it like a full-time thing. So that's what I'm doing now. So I'm running a growth marketing firm called Cogito.
Gotcha.
And now we have a bunch of YC and non-YC companies as clients.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before YC, had you raised any money for Suggestr?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yeah, we went through a startup accelerator. So we were one of the
Hmm.
8 or 7 or 9 teams that got funded in that cohort. So we got a small amount of money from them. Then we raised a bit more money from angels, some really nice, expert angels, very relevant to the field. Um, Very lucky to have partnered with them. So I think all in all, before YC, we'd raised about 100K or so in 100K US in funding.
All
So a
right.
very tiny
Cool.
pre-seed, if you think about it.
All right. Would it be appropriate to ask whether you guys were able to return money to investors once you guys decided to not continue, or is that something that you know?
It's a complicated one because yeah, essentially like we had a very tiny bit of money left, so
Mm,
like we were not able to return a significant amount of capital, maybe like cents on the dollar.
gotcha. Gotcha. And last question, if you were to do it all over again, what would you change?
Two things. If I wanted to do Suggestr again, I would not do it with venture backing. I would convince Alexi to do it on the side, like bootstrap it. Uh,
Yeah.
then it would make like a ton more sense. If I were to do a venture company again, I would have an idea which is like 10 times more ambitious. Um, I would do it for a much bigger target market. Have validate my go-to-market strategy much more than I did with Suggester. Make sure that distribution works and we can crack it before we invest into building out the product.
All right. Great. That was awesome. I loved your answers, and thank you so much for your time.
No worries. No worries.
Um,